My eyes flashed open. It was 1:30 in the morning. The only sound that came back to me was the rustling of my sheets as I moved around and heard the loud clicking noises of my fan. Frustrated that the clicking noise was losing my precious hours of sleep, I got up. I tried breathing in, but a sharp pain manifested in my chest, preventing me from breathing in more than I should. 5 years ago, when I moved in, me and my brother's bunk beds were split in half, so I got the top half and he got the bottom. I slept in the basement with its own room-like section, and he slept all the way upstairs in his room. However, it was until a year in this decrepit old house that we were living in that my parents found out that there were some toxins that were manifesting in my mattress, and I was breathing all that in for the past year. I have no idea how it got in, and I used to believe it was tar. But how could tar get in one's mattress? Whatever the substance was, it also managed to get all over my Uno cards that I kept right on my dresser next to my bed to pass the time. Often I'd use my fingernails to scrape the toxins off my cards, but out of fear of ripping or damaging the cards, I kept off. That toxin is pretty much what affects my breathing, and not even the doctors could find a way to fix it. I know this because I never had this problem years back. The conclusion they came up with was that it was a heart murmur that needed to be repaired via surgery. My family never had the money, so they backed off, and I wasn't too fond of inhalers, so it's something I've been forced to deal with ever since. Along with the toxins, my bed was very, very uncomfortable. I could feel the springs in the mattress as I tossed and turned. Sometimes they would pierce my shoulder or even my back. I was always sure to not jump on the bed, as the springs would probably pierce my tailbone. So as I tried to breathe in, and as much as I could without causing that stinging sensation to flood my chest, I walked over towards my fan. I grabbed it slightly as it moved from side to side, and smacked it upside repeatedly. It usually worked to stop the clicking noise, but would only come back after like 5 to 30 seconds, usually louder or quieter. Then I went back to sleep, but I just couldn't drift off. Even without the clicking noise, it still wasn't out cold. I always had a very eerie feeling about this house. I was scared that the house would cave in on itself because of how dusty and sturdy it felt. Whenever I heard footsteps coming from upstairs, I got more and more frightened that the floorboards would give out and cause whoever's above them to come tumbling down to this floor. Or worse, cause a chain reaction where a bunch of household appliances and tables and chairs crashed to the floor and crushed me to death. Usually whenever I was at the very top of the 3-story house in the bathroom, the doors were especially sturdy. The left door was a slide-in door that led to my parents' bedroom. It was very squeaky and had a loose doorknob that moved every time I tugged on it, but it was held together with very frail blue duct tape. Eventually it broke, so we got an actual doorknob. The right door was a normal but very sensitive door. And by sensitive, I mean whenever I let the force of gravity swing the door closed, it would slam instantly, instead of stopping on the door hole to let it close, which I always found odd. I could go on and on about my grievances for this house, as I was in this crumbling, broken place for the past 5 years, and I just wanted to move back to my old house and see my old friends again. But that would spawn a tangent about my childhood and other miscellaneous rants about how shitty this house is. But what I can say is this. Sometimes I get paranoid. And I mean really paranoid. More than I did back in Maryland. Not only does it greatly affect my social life, but also whenever the witching hour strikes and I just so happen to not be able to drift off the bed. The most I ever got scared back then was listening to my older fan as it spun and spun. At the time I was weirdly creeped out but fascinated by the emergency alert system tests, sometimes displayed during moments of emergencies locally. It happened a total of 11 times throughout my life. 4 for weather alerts, 5 for tests, 1 on my phone, and 1 for a child abduction. It was fascinating hearing different versions of the tones or how they'd play out in different scenarios across the country online, but in the process, the same blaring tones were etched into my brain, and whenever I thought of those eerie monotone sirens, a sense of panic enveloped my psyche. Sometimes, whenever I lay awake at night back then, I'd listen to the fan, hear its pattern very closely, and barely audibly make out the blaring tone. My mind fought weird scenarios sometimes, but I hated walking around the house at night out of fear that the tone would suddenly blast from any of the TVs. Once I moved away, the fear never really left. Sometimes, whenever I went to get something, I passed by the TV before walking upstairs to the middle floor. I walked slowly by the TV, staring at it in anticipation, waiting for the worst. Obviously, it never once blasted the tone, since there was no discernible channel signal coming from this TV, as I could only play my Wii U or my VHS player. I knew that it was turned off, yet I always never trusted it, and expected it to just pop out at me. By the time I went upstairs, things only got worse. There were 2 sides to the floor by the time I got up. Well, 3 if you count the middle. The middle, obviously, being the bathroom. The right side being the dining room and kitchen, which had the family computer on one of its corners, and the left side being the living room. Every single light in this floor is turned off at night, except for some of the kitchen and pantry lights, and the Christmas lights that we have hung around the room since we first moved. The lights slowly blinked over and over in a steady rhythm. In the process, when the lights blinked off, the whole room was pitch black, save for the light post right outside the window next to the TV. There was always something menacing about this TV, as opposed to the one downstairs. While that one has a confident bright light being shined down upon it from the laundry room, the one here was ominous. Like, as soon as the lights cut off, I expect the TV to disappear or the light to cut on and flash the warning. Once again, it never happened, but I always feared the worst whenever passing it by. Maybe it was the chemistry in my brain thinking of such irrational and illogical situations that never needed to happen. I just felt that if I made one wrong move, I'd be dead. Maybe it's schoolwork keeping me on edge again, who knows. So, I couldn't sleep. Another day of restless existentialism, my favorite. The pain in my chest still lingered, the clicking sound of the fan was driving me mad, the looming threat of death circled around in my brain, and, worst of all, I was hungry. So I figured I'd just tire myself out by watching YouTube on my phone and eating some goldfish inside of a bag that I kept next to my plushies. A night of laziness was all set. I had my phone, my food, and I realized, damn it, I don't have a drink. If there were any snacks involved, especially midnight snacks, it always needed to come with a drink to wash down the food. Otherwise, my throat would be left a dry, cut-up mess. And usually, if I never had a drink, I'd breathe through my mouth to let the air cool down the stinging to no avail. It was worth a shot, though. But since there were drinks in my reach, I figured I'd get one. My personal favorite was chocolate milk, which was pretty easy to make, since I've been doing so for like a decade at this point. The only problem was that it was upstairs, and I was already freaked out by the looming thought of death once more, so I figured to be extra cautious this time around. Once again, I went to the stairs and passed by the TV. I didn't so much as look at it this time, though I still shuddered as I sensed it nearby. I walked upstairs and tried my best to ignore the other TV on the left side. My dread only worsened as I went into the kitchen, however. Every single light was off, and I meant every single one. The kitchen lights, the pantry lights, and even the secondary Christmas lights hung near the dining table across the other window were completely turned off. I couldn't see a damn thing, not even the light post on the neighbor's house. It was pitch black. It wasn't even a result of bad weather or anything, it was just another cold night in autumn. I tried moving around through my environment, blind as a bat. I felt the keyboard and mouse belonging to the family computer. Since the computer never fully shuts off if I did so much as press a button or move the mouse slightly, the screen would kick on and I would enter a password to get into the computer. However, the computer also never turned on. In fact, there was no noise coming from the PC at all. It looked as if the plug was pulled. Fearing more for my safety, but too scared and frankly too lazy to go back downstairs to get my phone, I tried walking through my environment once more. I felt the post-it notes lying on the side of the counter that led to the kitchen. I was close. I walked a little bit to the left side, but not too much as to not trip over the boxes of expired candy that had been sitting dormant for the past few years. I felt the door handle to the fridge. Aha! I opened the door. Except there wasn't any light. Fruitless. I mean, sure, the fridge was still brewing cold air inside, as if the light was on, but it wasn't. Maybe the light was busted. Maybe the power was out. Nah, that sounds too irrational, even for me. Maybe all the lights gave out? If that were the case, then it might have been the most eeriest coincidence in my whole life. I said fuck this and decided to confront my fears and my laziness. So I closed the fridge door, went back downstairs, grabbed my phone, went back upstairs, and turned on the flashlight. And what I ended up seeing when I turned on that fucking flashlight, that thing, it'll never leave my head. It was what looked to be a skinned infant, or at least a skinned human that looked like an infant, except its arms were twice its height as it slowly and shakily grabbed the carton of milk that I was about to use for my chocolate milk. It made very startling gurgling noises as it breathed in and out, almost as if it was breathing in its own blood. What freaked me out as well was that the fridge light, it was on. And I could have sworn it was completely off the last time I opened it. The creature quickly jerked its head towards me and stopped moving altogether, frozen in place, like a statue. That face. That fucking face. It was what looked to be some kind of alien-looking creature, only it had features that were recognizable, but still distorted enough to seem unrealistic. But I swear to God that it was real. And it stared straight into my soul. Its eyes were like that of a hornet, only it had blindingly white pupils inside of its cold, empty sockets. It had no nose, only a mouth shaped like a perfect circle with perfectly square teeth in place of every part of its mouth in a circular pattern. I tried my best to scream. I really wanted my voice to emit something, to say something, scream something, but nothing ever budged. My vocal cords, they were failing me, and I was desperate. I was wheezing very quietly. I felt as pale as bones, and I was trembling just as much as the fucking creature was. The creature still staring at me. It slowly phased into the floor. The carton was still holding the carton. And it looked like it was slowly beginning to convulse violently. By the time the entirety of its body, except the hands, phased through, it let go of the carton. As its body melted into the cold wooden floor. And the carton laid on the floor, cap up. I've never seen that before. After a few more seconds of, wheezing and trembling, I dropped my phone to the floor, with the light illuminating the whole room, its FUD being the only loud noise I've heard since the whole ordeal, which made me jump. I couldn't even process what the actual fuck I just saw. All I did was slowly motion my hands to my mouth, just as I was about to let out the most gut-wrenching, horrified scream in my entire life. Something ear-ringingly loud blared on the other side of the room. There it was. Just as I suspected and feared for the longest time. The TV, which I thought was completely turned off, blurred those damn tones. Only this time, It took longer for each tone to cut until the next one played, leaving each tone to last for a maddening amount of time. I wheezed loudly as I covered my ears and curled myself into a ball on the floor, clenching my eyes shut and squishing my head so hard that I felt I could crush it with just my hands. It wasn't enough, however. I could feel the tone blaring downstairs and even upstairs. The tone blared from every single TV in the house. It felt as if it was right in front of me, even though I'm in a corner of the kitchen. As much as I tried keeping my eyes shut, every bit of my senses shut, all I could see was red and green splashes of paint violently shaking in front of a gray backdrop. There were phosphanes everywhere. I saw so many phosphanes. Way more than I'm used to. I never felt more disoriented in my entire life. As the tone stopped briefly, the cold, lifeless robotic voice of the announcer blared into my eardrums as the same deafening volume as before, informing the viewers at home that the tones were part of a monthly test. As the voice began to conclude the test, and my face continued to swell as tears and sweat streamed down the sides of my face, and my teeth clenched to the point where my jaw and gums stung and ached like hell, the voice cut off, and things were peaceful again. It was quiet. Too quiet. I gasped and opened my eyes, greeted by the very faint light coming from my phone. My eyes blurred as they began to adjust, and I uncovered my hands from my head. By then, I would have heard stomps coming from upstairs, probably from Dad, but I never heard any. How in the ever-loving fuck did anyone not hear that? Was I going mad? I got up, not paying attention to the phone nor the milk, and stumbled over to the living room to investigate. My vision was still blurry, and I felt my iron deficiency kick in, but I soldiered on. I crept towards it and barely poked my head from behind the wall. Sure enough, the TV was pitch dark. To this day, I don't think I'd ever forgive myself for what I ended up doing next. I've made an infinite amount of mistakes in my life as a pushover and as a screw-up, but this mistake I'm sure I learned from this time. I hesitated towards the TV, still unsure if something, anything else was about to hit me. I quickly grabbed the remote and backed away. I pressed the power button. Something suddenly cut on the TV. It wasn't necessarily something horrific, but it was enough to disorient me yet again. Bright colors flashed on the screen at a frame rate that was considered impossible for the human eye to comprehend. There was sound blasting from the TV, but it was so insanely loud that it caused the noise to distort and make a very slight ringing noise to my ears, combining horribly with static. As soon as every single fiber of what illuminated from my TV assaulted my senses, I jumped and screamed a very loud scream. My vision began to blur again, and suddenly, I felt a warm liquid excreting from my ears. Then my mouth, nose, eyes, my vision began to go, began to go red. I came to the shocking realization that all my senses were so disoriented that the receivers for them began to bleed. I couldn't feel, I couldn't see, I couldn't breathe, hear, smell. I couldn't even scream either. My own blood was silencing the screams of terror and agony, uselessly bellowing from my vocal cords. I closed my eyes and I felt the tears of blood join the other streams flowing from other parts of my face, like my nose or my mouth. And suddenly, through my ears, I heard the faint sound of someone walking upstairs. It never usually happens, since I'm not in the middle floor and never hear stuff from upstairs. It sounded like thunderous stomps at first. It sounded like really shaky, like that creature, the fucking creature that I saw in the kitchen. But it also sounded vividly similar to the sounds that would come from this floor whenever I was in the basement. And how the fuck could I hear it if my ears were covered, and every other sound should be overpowering the stomps? The ringing in my ears began to sound like a countdown horn. It sounded familiar. And then my eyes opened. I awoke in a cold sweat, breathing heavily, then flinching because of the pain in my chest, noticeable enough to make me impulsively tear up slightly. The first thing I heard was the sound of my brother playing Mario Kart Wii on the other side of the basement floor, right next to my room. I also heard the sounds of footsteps coming from upstairs, probably Dad checking up on him or to play with his dumb Nerf toys. The first thing I saw was my still blurred vision, not because I didn't have my glasses on, but because my eyes were really teary and practically stung from having such tired eyes flashed open. I noticed my cat Leo hanging out under the covers that shielded the glass doors. I heard some scratching and a faint meow. My nose was stuffed, and the sensation of tears also contributed to snot in my nose. My mouth was completely covered in my own drool, my ear holes were covered in earwax, on the count that I still had my headphones in as I was listening to music that sent me off to sleep, but they must have gotten knocked off somewhere as I tossed and turned as usual. The first thought on my mind was, what the actual fuck just happened? As I pondered and tried processing what happened, the nightmare only slipped further and further away from my grasp of consciousness until I couldn't even remember a single detail. My brother finished his round and went to check up on me, seeing as he heard my gasping for air when I awoke. He is the most socially inept of the entire family and has trouble trying to think of any coherent sentences without slowing down his speech, relating the conversation to a meme he saw on Reddit, or darting his eye contact somewhere else. Butthead reincarnated. However, he was eerily staring at me as he relayed information to me, almost as if he was normal. Too normal. Dad wanted me to wake you up, he said, as I'd probably expect. Thanks, I said back to him. Just had the most awful nightmare in a long while. My brother nodded in confirmation. He heard you screaming while he was asleep. He saw you curled up in front of the TV and brought you back downstairs. He also saw a carton of milk in the middle of the kitchen floor.